This is not a typical love story, right?
No.
It's a tragic love story, really. Hey everyone, here with our second coaching call. This is a really good one, a really great writer. I know you're going to get a lot out of this, especially if you're working on love stories, if you have a love story subplot or any kind of love story that you're working on. For everyone, make sure you click subscribe. So if you want more great coaching content like this, make sure you hit subscribe so that you can get updated when we post new things. This episode has some mature content, so be warned about that. There's also spoilers. If you ever read this book in 6 months to 2 years, whenever it's published, there are some spoilers. We're going to get into the content of her book. So be warned about that as well. All right, let's get into it. Well, let's look at your premise and then we'll jump into synopsis and then kind of work our way through the book plan. So premise, a 19-year-old Australian backpacker moves to Paris to learn French and seek love and learns a lot about herself and the world in the process. And you have over here in your plots, just this feels like a maturity versus naivete plot, self-hate versus self-love, which we'll want to come back to. Subplots, religious conversion, child going through difficulties and hence runs to family, moving on from childhood sweetheart. Okay. That's
Those
great.
3 different.
Okay. Coming of age, commercial women's fiction. So Bridget Jones's Diary, 50 Shades of Grey, Wild. But you didn't put Emily in Paris. Is there a reason you left out Emily in Paris just because you were mad at it?
Yeah, because it's, I guess, yeah, it is similar but different because it wasn't a book. That was why.
Oh, it's like,
Yeah.
I get it. Yeah. I mean, for a comp, if you were like pitching agents, you might not, I don't know. That would be a good question to ask an agent friend. Like, would it be okay to mention Emily
Yeah.
Paris?
Well, in the agent's letters that I've been drafting through this course I've just finished, I put that line that I put into the synopsis for you with it's a little bit Bridget Jones, it's a little bit Shades of Grey, but it's definitely not Emily in Paris. So
Oh, I
that's
like that.
a bit,
No, that's good.
yes.
Okay. Title, How I Found My Clit. Wow. That is a title.
It is a title. I mean, actually, my partner came up with it.
Oh, wow.
It's meant to be attention grabbing, so I'm interested in your opinion.
Okay. At 19 years old, Denise still had a lot to learn about herself, including the location of her own clitoris. Could Paris deliver? I actually like this a lot. The title, I'm not so sure about. And I do think you'll want to like sneak Paris into the title if possible. Right.
So the plan was to not, just
Okay.
because, there's so much. So when I imagine the cover, I imagine it having like a Paris photo on it,
Mhm.
but not necessarily having Paris in the photo. But
The
nothing's
title, you mean?
set in stone, still gathering opinions. I just
Yeah.
think, something in
That's a good
Paris,
point.
Paris, that, it's so overdone.
It's overdone because sometimes it sells books, right? So if you want to sell books, that can be a great strategy.
Okay.
So I wouldn't necessarily I hear what you're saying about having it in the cover. And I think sometimes you don't want to double up, like have the same thing on the cover as in the title. But you're not going to have a cover when you're pitching agents, right? And
Yeah.
making it super clear that this is a Paris love story, essentially. Self-love story, but also there's love story elements,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think there's something to that. All right. This is a fictionalized retelling of a year spent living and working in Paris from 1999 to 2000. It's a little bit Bridget Jones and a little bit 50 Shades of Grey. It's definitely not Emily in Paris. I made the decision to stay in Paris following several months of backpacking when I found myself tired, broke, and infatuated with the French language. Okay, maybe there was a boy in there too. I like that. Tragically, he wasn't interested in me in that way or anyway. That was just for the first 3 severely broken hearts I suffered that year. My self-esteem, which was already hovering around ground level, seemed to pick up a shovel and start digging with each new hurt. Still, it wasn't all bad in terms of adventure and personal growth. It was actually pretty darn good. I made 2 amazing friends who were going through some pretty crazy shit themselves. I learned French. I worked as an au pair for 2 incredible kids, and I watched some spectacular fireworks over the Eiffel Tower at the turn of the millennium. I learned a lot about myself too, not just that I actually did possess a certain pleasure-inducing organ, but that I was into some pretty kinky stuff, which may have been related to some childhood experiences and traumas. In the end, I discovered that romance is not the simple transaction Hollywood makes it out to be. And that if I wanted to find love from the outside, I had to somehow find it first from within. All right, this is good. There's some really good stuff here. Let's look at your outline because, well, first of all, I just want to talk about this
Yep.
as your main plot because I definitely see that in this story that you're trying to really focus on growing up and maturing. And it's so hard to pull off internally driven stories,
Okay.
right? That with internal stories as the main plot, you know.
Mm.
And if you think about it this way, looking at the different values, have you read The Right Structure?
No.
My book about story structure. So if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And there's life and death, or life at the top, like survival, safety, and then just moving down to looking like belonging to a community, esteem, feeling good about yourself, and then to self actualization, which is sort of what a maturity coming of age story is about. It's about becoming the best version of yourself, right? Kind of
Yep.
working through who you are and growing fully into that person. Okay. When you think about that, all of those things are happening inside of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
You are trying to figure out who you are and become that version. And most of the things above that on the hierarchy of needs are happening on the outside of you, right? So safety, okay? Being safe from other people, which is what a lot of murder stories are about, or
Yeah.
thrillers are essentially about safety. That's all happening on the outside, even esteem, which kind of sounds like it's happening inside of you, is also happening on the outside of you because you have to earn that esteem from the people around you. You have to earn their approval, right? And love and belonging, that's obviously happening on the outside. So what that matters for fiction writers is that when we're trying to do show don't tell, right, it becomes very difficult if you're writing about things that are happening on the inside of you. Okay. Now, just from like glancing over your exposition, it does seem, or your kind of quick outline here, it does seem like you have a lot of things that are happening on the outside, right? There's a lot of exciting events. Okay. And that's really important and good. And so keep pressing into that. But one of the dangers that I see a lot of people who are working on their main plots with internal kind of values, like maturity, like coming of age stories, is that it becomes very internally driven. And we see a lot of conversations at coffee shops and like really just sitting around thinking about things and not a lot of people doing things, right? And there is value in sitting around and thinking about things. There's value to going to therapy. There's value in having deep, meaningful conversations with people at cafes. And those are boring stories, right? Those are great life things that happen to you, and they're boring stories, right? Really pressing into the external things. And for you, especially love story elements, right? Because you have a non-traditional love story plot, which I think is great, but I think it's still really important to know that that's kind of your external genre, if you were to say it in story grid terms, or your external plot type. That is the canvas that you're painting, it seems like, right? Would you
Yep.
say that that's true?
Yeah. Sorry, I got a little bit distracted.
No, all good.
Yeah.
A lot going on. So yeah, we're having like dueling kid wars. Like my kids, your kids, they're trying to get in the middle of this. It's good.
Yeah, that's why I locked myself in the office, but then the internet was too weak. So we're just gonna have to make do, I'm afraid.
It's gonna be great. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the point is, yeah, that just really pressing into this love story. And I would almost say that this is your main plot and say that this is your internal plot.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would just say hate versus love. You know that this is self-hate versus self-love, but just again, the canvas that you're painting with is like an external
Yeah.
love story, all of the elements of love story. Now it's a failed love story in some ways, but like it's a love story pop. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by the way, one thing I like to remind people about is for the arc, each one of these will have its own arc. So the love story plot will have its own arc.
I just sort of
Yeah,
drew
no,
it
it's great. Great.
from memory, just thinking about what happens, these are all those top peaks are all the sex scenes. And then the bottom ones there when I get dumped that final time.
That's perfect. That's exactly the right place that should be.
And then
So,
at the end, there's a really nice scene with the best friend and having a little adventure
okay.
and then
But then it ends here, like in the middle.
I guess I just did that. Yeah, I don't know why. Like it's sort of like it had to be, but I mean, it's neutral at the end. Like she just leaves Paris and ponders.
But she
everything.
learns things, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's come back to that too.
Yeah.
All right. So looking through this quick outline. So exposition, setting Paris 1999. Denise, part one, Tom. When you say part one, what do you mean by that?
So part one, I'm considering to be the time that she's working as an au pair, because after that, it's sort of towards the end of the time in Paris, but it's almost halfway through the book when she changes jobs and goes into this sort of new life where her two best friends have gone, the family's gone. She gets a new job in a foreign exchange office. She moves into a new house. She gets a new friendship group, and it's a whole different set of experiences. So it's sort of like part one, part two.
Okay. I think this outline is super helpful, but I would put setting Paris 1999 as the exposition, right?
Yep.
And the character. And then part one, Tom might be the inciting incident.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I've sort of been thinking a lot about the inciting incident because in some ways it's just, in that very first chapter,
Yeah.
when she's sort of pondering what to do and she just makes that decision that she's going to stay. And that sets the whole thing in motion because she's staying in Paris.
Yeah.
Going to London or going back home or whatever else she could have done at that point.
Hopefully we'll have time to look at that and talk more about that because it's really important. So part two, talk to me. She goes and finds new friends and a new job, right? All right. Yeah. So you have deciding to stay in Paris, being dumped as a friend by Tom. When does that happen?
So that's quite early on as well. That's chapter 3, I think. So chapter 2.
What percent, like, would you say of the way through if we were to look at it on this arc here? Okay. So like pretty early, like maybe 10%.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's no romance. I mean, she liked him and was interested, but he was not. And then at one point, he's just like, "Yeah, we can't hang out at all." And so,
Yeah.
obviously, pretty upsetting to anyone.
Right. Okay. I gotcha.
Yeah.
Do you have some kind of declaration of that sect and I'm going to stay in Paris anyway?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I know we're hating on Emily in Paris, but there is that moment, right, where she's like dumped by her boyfriend and she's like, I'm just going to stay here anyway. And one thing that also makes me think about too is that, again, you don't have a traditional love story arc, right? And let's look at like just every cliche chick flick.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So I'm going to just do that. So character,
like a sine wave.
They start out not really knowing each other. And then maybe they don't like each other at first, but then there's some attraction. They're getting together. Maybe they have a first kiss or a first, more things. And then there's some kind of breakup, right? Like she discovers something bad about him or he discovers something bad about her and they break up. Okay. Then there's the breakup phase. And then at some point in the breakup phase, they realize, oh, I can't live without this person. I have to be with them. And then there's the proof of love scene, which is the climactic scene, right? And it's the guy driving across New York City or running through the airport or whatever, all of those cliche scenes. That's proof of love. And that's the climax. And then they end together, kissing happily ever after. This is a Cinderella arc, and it's like the quintessential love story arc, right? We've seen it a million times.
Yeah.
So there's obviously variations of that, but like that's the shape of most love stories, most commercial love stories. Yours is not that, right? Very much not. But what is true is that you have this almost episodic feel,
Yeah.
right? Like there's kind of love interest after love interest after love interest after love. And that episodic feel, it is similar to Emily in Paris, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I would just think of those as little arcs,
Yeah.
okay? And each one has its own kind of, if you were writing a TV episode or if you were writing a novella, like think about them as you're writing them from that perspective of
Yeah.
the beginning and end of the arc of Tom, right?
Yeah.
Because you have to meet the expectations. Every single one of those needs to have similar feelings of the love story shape, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Even though then none of them end with anybody going and declaring their love for each other. And
but that's why it works as episodic, you know?
yeah.
And also it plays perfectly into your maturity versus naivete thing, because where this can work really well is if you have a lot of arcs of external arcs, right? If you have a lot of elements from other things. So that could actually be fine and it could work perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So Tom doesn't want to hang out anymore. Denise starts going out most nights, drinking a lot, sleeping with random guys. One thing that I do not like, that you have to be careful about, is that sleeping with random guys is dangerous for that love story arc, right? Because in every love story thing, meaningless relationships is not part of that arc, right? It
Yeah.
has to be meaningful. Okay. So I don't know. I would
Yeah.
just be careful about that.
Yeah. It's sort of, so there's two random pickups which are actually shown, one towards the beginning and one towards the end, and they kind of contrast each other. So the first one is really unsatisfying, really just like, why did she even do that? You know, what was the point of that? The guy in the morning leaves and like says, oh, she's like, can you buy me a packet of cigarettes? And he leaves and never comes back. And she's just like, okay. And then at the end, there's another one where it's someone that it's a friend that she knew before, and it's really nice and it's really enjoyable. And this is right after she got dumped by the main love interest that she really fell hard for and was really interested in. And then he said, look, it's not working for me. I don't want to continue. And so she just like puts on a face full of makeup and goes down the pub and picks up this
Okay.
guy that she already knew.
I like that.
Yeah, and then it's actually quite nice. And he also leaves. He doesn't stay the night or anything. But she sort of feels more cared for, I guess.
Yeah.
And like, yeah. And it
Where
sort
is
of
that?
it shows that
the,
no, that's the big one at the end.
that's here. And this
Yeah.
is the guy.
No, that's with the female friend. So the pickup, like it's not part of that.
Oh,
It's
okay.
just like part it's I guess it's part of the lowest point. Because it's still trashy, you know, but it just is like it's sort of a mirror on the beginning of where she was to how she sort of approaches things differently. And she does it as a rebound to sort of go like, oh, you dumped me. Well, you know, I can look at what I can still do.
That works.
But then the high point is with the female friend. So the female relationship's probably a bit more powerful than the ones with the males. Like the males are there. And obviously she's really interested in finding that romantic love, but it's through the development of the female friendships that she learns a lot more about herself and about how the world works and seeing what they're going through as well, because both of the female friends have their own arcs and are also learning in a similar age, both au pairs as well. Yeah. Oh no. No. That's yes. That's the low point where it's building. Yeah. So that's the middle one. The second low point.
Here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh wow. That's
Yeah.
early on.
It's probably actually closer to halfway than that picture.
Okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
That works
As
for
I
me.
said, I was doing it, yeah, sort of really on the fly. So it's probably slightly before halfway. But it's just a point where she's like, this isn't working. Like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
But then that's why it comes across as weird when in your number 5, when I've got like the climax and it goes through like 17 different things and it's a whole second half of
Right.
the book, really, because that's not the climax. But I
Yeah.
think,
No, I would say that this is still part of the rising action. This is definitely still part of rising action, right?
mm, yeah,
Usually, I mean, this is going to be climax, right?
yeah.
Right here, probably. And maybe here. I don't know. So talk to me about what this is. So she gets broken up with, and then how
Yeah.
is that worse than sitting on the edge of the roof thinking about jumping?
So that's like, in their stories, how there's always a part that's like a just depressed and they can't do anything. And they just like sit there staring out the window as the rain falls
Yeah.
and,
Like a dark night of the soul moment.
that.
Okay. So
Yeah.
she's with this guy right here,
Yeah.
and then he breaks up with her, and then we're down here and she's staring at rain falling,
Yeah.
but not thinking about killing herself because that would be way too active with where she's at. That would take way too much work.
It
Like
just she stops going to work and she just sort of just stays home.
letting her life fall apart. Yeah. Okay. And then she has a great moment with her friend. What happens after the great moment with the friend?
They spend some time talking about what went wrong with the guy.
Yeah.
The friend never liked the guy in the first place,
Yeah.
but she still is sympathetic and she listens and she's like, I hate to tell you this, but if you don't love yourself, how are you ever going to love anybody else? Or how's anybody going to love you? You have to stop telling me how fat and ugly you are, just, and so they sort of talk things out a little bit. And then there's a final singing lesson. So the singing is an important part of it all. Then
Tell me more about that.
there's this character who's a singer and he sings in bars and he's amazing. And Denise starts going to him for lessons and he's very intuitive on a personal level as well. So he sort of becomes like a mentor and helping her work through some issues and stuff and also helping her discover those hidden desires and things that she didn't really know she had. Even they don't sleep together or anything, but he just like, yeah, he's just a special kind of character. But then the music is a really important theme throughout the whole thing. So there's a lot of mentions of the music they were listening to, the music they're dancing to in the bars, the music she listens to when she's on the roof listening to, the Doors or whatever, and then she's when she's going to the singing lessons, the song that she chooses to sing is "Don't Speak" by No Doubt. And then at the end, when she gets dumped, then she goes back to the singing lesson and she sings it, and the teacher's like, "Wow, that's really good," and it's because she's feeling it.
So how much do we want to fictionalize here? Do we want to do any fictionalizing here?
We can. Why? What do you think? I
Okay.
don't want to
So
be. I don't want to be too set in like this is how it must be. This is my
no, no.
story.
Hey,
So otherwise, why would I be here?
well, you don't have to do this. And I think one thing I want you to do, oops, gosh, it's really hard to move these guys around all together. So one thing I want you to do is break apart these arcs. Okay. I want you to have a love story arc. Okay.
Mhm.
And this is the end of the love story arc. To be clear, it ends tragically. It's a tragic love story. All
Yeah.
right. This is the end of it. I want you to think about the maturity part of your story as its own arc too. Okay.
Yeah.
So if we were to just draw this out, we have the love story arc, and it's kind of like actually up here because you really like Tom, and then he breaks up with you. And then there's some other guys, and then, like this, and then this, and then this.
Yeah.
Like so bad. Like way down here. Okay?
Yeah.
Tragedy. And that's great. Then I need you to have a coming of age story arc. Let's say that's green. And you start out as immature, right? And then you maybe like go through some maturing, and then maybe you have some immature moments. Maybe that roof scene is part of that. And then like you end up all here, right? High, right? And it's almost an inverse, right? And this, by the way, is that like this moment with your friend is that climax. That's what this is. Okay. Is in terms of subplot, we're a little bit muddled. Okay. Usually most novels have 3 stories. So let's think about Emily in Paris because we hated it, but it's helpful, right? Love story, lots of jumps and jaggedness. But there's one main arc. It's that chef guy, right? And that's like the main arc, but then in the middle there's a lot of jaggeds. Subplot is a performance story as she is getting better at her job, right? She starts out low. She starts out with, no, she's just low. I mean, it's like just about as bad of a start as you could get. And then she's doing really well, but then she messes up that one client, but then she succeeds. And that's pretty much it. Like she's kind of dominating by the end. But I mean, there's some peril potentially, but like she's doing pretty well. So actually kind of similar. And then there's an internal arc just as she like grows in confidence. For you, we need a clear subplot, and what it could be is a performance story. And music and performing musically is a performance story, right? Performance is all about esteem. So looking good in front of other people that you care about, or just looking good in front of other people.
So maybe I sort of got a bit overzealous with what I included in the subplots because other people have to have things too, right?
Sure.
It can't all just be about the
Of
central
course.
character and their different journeys.
Of course.
The
They
various-
have their own arcs that we sometimes get glimpses of. Right.
yeah. So that's what those are. And they don't take, they don't take precedence or anything, but yeah, I think it's important that the religious conversion is one of the good friends who in the beginning is in love with a Jewish boy. She's from Norway. She's Catholic. And then she decides she wants to convert to be able to stay with him. But then he breaks up with her. But then she decides she wants to convert anyway.
Oh, wow.
And she ends up moving to Israel.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That's cool.
that's a true story. And
I
yeah,
like that. No, I mean, think about like, gosh, you're going to hate me, but Emily in Paris again. That one girl has her own arc, right? The singer girl, she has her own arc.
yeah. I didn't actually watch it to the end, but I do. I think I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
The boss lady has her own arc, right?
Mm. Yeah.
So you have characters in your story and they are going through things too. And
Yeah.
those are
And
subplot. And I'm fine with that. I'm just wondering because here's the thing. You have to decide whether you want this to be a sad ending, right? And
yeah.
if you end with breakup and final conversation with friend, that is a maturing ending. And it's also kind of sad. And that's okay, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Alternatively, if you have a performance story subplot, that final performance, what if it's in front of a bunch of people? Something that she's terrified to do, you know?
Yeah.
And she does it and proves how much she's grown, right?
Yeah.
Not just to him, but it just ups the stakes if she's afraid to perform in front of people and then she does and it's amazing. So that's my only thought, and it could just end it off with a bang, which could be kind of cool and
Mm.
kind of show, like we're talking about, show the growth
Yeah.
that she's made.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's actually not a bad idea. That could work.
I don't mind if it's just in front of him and it's powerful, but there's something about it raising the stakes of that and thinking about it like a climactic moment,
Yeah.
right? The climactic moment of her internal growth journey.
Yeah, no, it would change things a bit because as it stands, she's always wanting to perform but never gets the opportunity.
Yeah.
So I could change it so that she doesn't want to perform. She's scared to perform, but she's happy to learn. And then at the end, she gets called up on stage and she's all shaking and then is able to perform well.
So the earlier that you can introduce that, the better. All right.
Yeah.
At what point does that performance element happen right now?
So it's in that part 2 section when she meets the singing teacher and she goes and she starts having lessons. But part of that is because she meets him through his performances in pubs because he's playing twice a week and she starts going every time. And then the love interest is also at those same pubs and he sings and plays in the breaks. So he's also a performer.
I gotcha.
Mm.
I'm just wondering if you could sneak it in somewhere in
Bit
like
before that.
the first 3 chapters.
Yeah. In the
Is
beginning, the music element is still there because there's a lot of description of the music that they're listening to. And, when she first meets the best friend, they bond because she goes over and stays the night and they're singing along to all the songs and dancing in the room and stuff.
I think if you just introduce something about her loving music and wanting to be a singer and being afraid of performing early on, the payoff for this will be better. And if she could like be walking by a bar and she sees the teacher, right? Depending on how much we want to fictionalize,
Yeah.
but
It's
she's
like,
just drawn to him.
oh, yeah. So have him come in earlier.
Yeah, just as a glimpse. You want to try to introduce characters in the first, 25%,
Yeah.
if you can. So because we're kind of episodic, this story is kind of episodic, it can be okay. Still, earlier the better.
Yeah.
All right. All right.
It's sort of hard to know exactly where my story fits in terms of genre and everything. Like
Yeah.
which books it would sit next to on the shelf kind of thing, because it's sort of a travel thing, but it's also just a self-fiction.
It's women's fiction. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's upmarket women's fiction and it's not chick lit, but it's
No.
not chick lit, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So look for other love story episodic love story stories set
Yeah.
in other countries,
Yeah.
and look at women's fiction and you can dip into chick lit. Just be careful about stuff that's too like this is not a typical love story, right?
No.
It's a tragic love story, really.
Yeah.
So you need to find other books that kind of fit more that box rather than
Yeah.
romance.
Yeah. And I think it's fine to be different, right?
Mhm.
You don't want to fit too neatly in any box.
I mean, yours fits into its own great box, and it's great.